I discovered my wife had a 6-month affair 10 years ago. The paternity of my daughter is now in question. I'm looking for opinions from other men who have faced something similar. My wife and I are both in our late 50s. We met in college and dated for 4 years before getting married in 1997. We have a son, 26, and a daughter who is 10. Yes, you read that right. There's a 16-year age gap between our children. I'll discuss this in greater detail later in this post. Just after we got married, I took a job in another city across the state, and we moved shortly thereafter. The year after our son was born, we bought our current home, and it's in a really nice area where we've made good friends. It's the perfect spot to raise our family. My wife studied education but didn't go after a full-time job. She decided to be a stay-at-home mom while doing some substitute teaching a couple of days a month. Now that our daughter is in school, my wife has been able to pick up a few more days each month. Overall, we get along great, and our marriage had been a solid and happy one until recently. Isn't that what they all say in these stories? Just over a month ago, I was going through some old electronics we stockpiled in the closet of our spare bedroom. I had this big box with lots of old stuff in it. There were some old computers, tablets, and even a tube TV that we didn't use anymore. I wanted to make sure we got rid of them in a good way, so I thought of taking them to the place where they recycle old stuff. Before doing that, I needed to check if there were any important files or personal info left on them, so I plugged them in to clear out all the old stuff and make sure nothing important was left behind. It was a tedious task, but it was something I had been wanting to do for a long time. The exercise was uneventful until I got to the tablet my wife used before I bought her the new iPad she uses now. When I powered it up initially, I didn't notice anything needing to be removed, as she really only used the device for browsing, shopping, and social media. I was about to do a reset when I came across an app I didn't know she had been using. I opened the app, and there I found hundreds of messages between my wife and another user dating back nearly 10 years ago now. What kind of app stores messages from 10 years ago? After reading the messages, I soon deducted that the person she had been communicating with was a former neighbor who lived 2 houses down from us and that he and my wife had an affair. It seems the affair kicked off around May and lasted until just before Labor Day that year. They used the app to plan meetups, sometimes at his place and sometimes at ours. I have to say it's pretty awful. She was cheating, but what's worse is bringing that guy back to her place. That's just plain gross. At the time, this guy was a window and door salesman, and I bought a new set of windows and a door from him for our 3-season room for their final messages. It appears the affair ended when my wife discovered she was pregnant with our daughter. I could see the regret in her messages as she told him she was pregnant and wanted to break things off to rededicate herself to our marriage. Now, was she regretful because she was breaking it off with him? Or was she regretful because she cheated? In one of their last messages, he asked her if the child was his. She replied, telling him she didn't think so as she had been intimate with me 4 times that week and only 1 time with him. That is just sick. It's a really tough situation. Imagine feeling shocked when you found out your wife was expecting a baby, especially after being told she might not be able to have more children due to a condition called obesity, which makes it harder to conceive. It must have been surprising because you'd gone without using protection for a while, believing that it might be impossible to get pregnant. And to top it off, discovering she'd been involved with 2 other guys during that time must have been really upsetting. Originally, we planned on having a big family, but after the diagnosis, we thought, if it happens, it happens, and if it doesn't, it doesn't. When we found out she was pregnant, I was over the moon with joy about having another child. Reading each of those messages between them was like getting punched in the gut. I couldn't believe it and was completely sickened by the whole thing. Never in a million years would I have dreamed that my wife could ever do something like this again. Isn't that what all these guys say in these stories? After discovering the messages, I was about to confront her. But then, something inside me told me to stop and to think it through. Now that's smart, because you may have done something foolish. You may have done something rash, and it's always better to step back even though you've got a lot of emotion going and think about it before you act. He says, give it a little more thought and do a little more investigating before making any decisions I may regret later. After all this happened nearly 10 years ago, when our marriage has been wonderful, especially since the birth of our daughter. That's a major question mark right there. How can you say your marriage is fantastic when there's evidence of your wife cheating? It's a huge deal, and I get the panic about your daughter. The thought of her not being yours must be overwhelming. Even if that was the case, your love for her would likely stay strong. But it's a lot to process and figure out how you'd handle it. I'd love her just the same, although my heart would be broken far beyond what my wife had already done for the rest of the day. I went on as normal as if I hadn't seen the messages. I took all the old electronics, except for my wife's old tablet, of course, to the recycle center. My daughter came with me and I took her out to lunch afterwards. This all happened exactly 4 weeks ago today. And since that time, I've shut everything out of my mind and have been going on as normal. As I said, my marriage has been wonderful. No, it hasn't. And I love my kids with my entire being. If I confront my wife about the affair, it will open up a Pandora's box, which could end our marriage and potentially reveal that my daughter isn't mine. Certainly, it seemed like I was moving forward, almost accepting what had happened until that Friday arrived. It was like a bolt from the blue. Suddenly, I felt this intense wave of anger and betrayal swirling inside me. It was like a storm brewing after days of calm. Emotions can be pretty unpredictable, especially when dealing with something as profound as this. So after those moments of apparent calmness, this sudden surge of intense feelings left me utterly shaken. I thought it would subside, but instead it has progressively gotten worse throughout the weekend. I now feel like I want to confront my wife and make her explain herself, then confront her lover and extract a pound of flesh from him for what he did to me. I realize now they are both scum and deserve to be punished. So this guy really had an about face here. While I would never physically hurt anyone, that's smart. Never employ violence unless it's for self-defense, as I always say. I do want them to pay dearly for what they did. The guy and his family moved away the year after the affair took place, and I don't believe my wife has ever had contact with him since. But who knows? You know, that's interesting because I think this is like the third story I've done where a wife, or maybe it was a fiance, hooked up with somebody in the neighborhood, and then that affair partner moves away. It's just interesting how these stories have these similarities where the AP gets out of Dodge. I have now got this sudden urge to tell his wife and destroy his marriage, making him suffer as I have been for the past month. I hear you're really curious about your daughter's DNA. You're thinking about checking it, even though it won't change how you feel about her. It's like wanting to solve a puzzle, right? But keep in mind, finding out might make things harder. If you don't tell your wife, it might lead to bigger problems later. It's a tricky situation that might cause more trouble down the line. You take action. You're a man. Step up and do what you need to do. That's where my mindset is today. And that's why I've decided to make this post to get some feedback. I really can't talk to anyone about this, and I don't want it getting out based on all the facts I provided you here. What would you do if you were me? I'm here to share some responses he received from others in the community. But before we jump into that, if you're enjoying the content, a thumbs up would really help this video reach more people and spread the word. It's a way to support and grow our community here. Now let's take a look at some of those responses. The first one is from a woman, and she says, "I'll respond as someone who's been in your wife's situation. To summarize, I had a brief and foolish affair with a deacon from our church. It lasted less than a month, and during that time I became pregnant. I didn't tell my husband, but he found out 9 years later through all written correspondence I had with a man. It seems like he took a drastic step going for a DNA test, but emotions were probably running high. His reaction might have been unexpected, but sometimes people react in extreme ways when they feel deeply hurt. Communication during tough times can be really tough, especially without modern technology like texting or social media to help. The results showed he wasn't her father. He divorced me even though we had 5 kids together, including our aforementioned daughter, who was the youngest. Over the years, I've begged for his forgiveness, but he never gave it. He did, however, continue to be a wonderful father to all of our kids, including our daughter. I'm 64 now and have never remarried. I really haven't dated anyone else. I'm still full of regret for the mistake I made long ago. My husband did remarry and led a happy life until he passed away 2 years ago at the age of 69. I hope things work out for you and your wife." Well, the takeaway from your response is that your husband did the right thing by divorcing you and moving on with his life because he remarried someone else. So, someone mentioned the guy who went through this, ended up happy till the end of his life, and still had his kids close. That's pretty surprising considering all that happened. Another person, a man, shared that the story made him feel terrible because he went through something similar 6 years back with his girlfriend when they lived together. "I found out 8 months after the birth of what I thought was our son that he wasn't mine. It broke my heart and crushed my soul, and I seriously contemplated ending it all." Never contemplate taking yourself out. Never even consider that because you're worth so much more. Don't let one person drag you down. Nobody is worth that much. He continues on. He says, "Thankfully I didn't, and instead walked away from her and her child and never looked back. To this day, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. That was almost 7 years ago, and I'm now married to a great woman, and we have 2 beautiful children together. So here's another example of the guy moving on and actually getting a better life. As far as I know, my ex has never had another relationship, and for years, she tried getting me back before I got married. I'm occasionally seeing her and her son around town, and each time I do get a little sad for the boy and hope he has a good life. It is a shame for this little boy who now has to grow up in a single mother-led household. While I don't want to lessen the hard work of single moms, many of them do an amazing job. I feel like our society is facing challenges, and I wonder if it's because some kids are raised without a dad around. I'm not saying all single moms can't do it well, but when kids grow up without a father, I think it might impact how things are going in our world. But that's just my observation. Next, here's another response from a woman. She says, "Thank you for your post. I've responded to tell you that things can turn out beautifully for you and your wife, even if you find out your daughter is not yours. My husband and I are living proof of that. Oh boy. We have 3 children together, including our middle child, who was conceived from a short-lived affair I had with a family acquaintance. Well, isn't that nice? It was the worst decision of my life because it jeopardized my marriage. But it was also the best decision of my life because my husband and I were blessed with our daughter." Initially, when he found out my husband had his mind set on divorcing me and was taking steps to revoke paternity. But once he held our daughter, he had a change of heart. So this all happened around 16 years ago. My husband loves our daughter wholeheartedly, just like any dad would love their child. She's deeply attached to her dad and doesn't have any interest in knowing her biological father. And just to clarify, despite what some might think, my husband is far from a pushover. He's a confident and content man, and I've made sure he's been well taken care of all these years. Well, I'd like to talk to your husband to get his side of things because I'm sure he probably would tell a different story. And finally, we've got another response from a guy, and he's short and sweet with his response. He says, "Rug sweeping never works, my friend. It will eat you alive and start impacting other parts of your life. You need to DNA test both your kids." Yes, I mean both of them. And he has both in capital letters from what I've experienced. Cheaters are cheaters. If you caught her once, I would wager she probably had been cheating on you all along and gotten away with it. Stop thinking only about the well-being of others and start taking care of yourself too. That's good advice from that guy. Especially that last sentence, because so many men are always looking out for the well-being of others, and they really don't take care of themselves. And guess what? If something happens to you, it's not only going to impact you, but it's going to impact your kids and the rest of your family. So take care of yourself, guys. After a couple of weeks since the first post, the person came back to share more about what happened after they posted before. They were really surprised by all the messages they received. They expected a few replies, but it turned out to be way more than they thought. There were lots of people who shared their own stories and gave them a ton of support. Now for the update. After thinking things through for another week, I decided to confront my wife with the evidence. I sat her down, pulled out her old laptop, and started reading the messages. She started weeping, "Isn't that what they all do?" and asked me to stop. But I didn't and continued to read the messages until she ran out of the room and into our bedroom. She stayed in there for a good 44 minutes before returning to talk to me. So what she was doing there, I'm sure, is she was like, "Oh man, I didn't realize he was going to find this out. Let me get away and then go craft my story, and then I'll come back out and spin the story to him." I think that's what she was doing. He says when she did, the first thing I asked her was why. Why did she do it? She said she didn't know and that it was stupid. Now listen to this. She says she then said she felt like we were having marital problems back then, and I was becoming distant. So being vulnerable, she latched on to someone who showed interest in her. She's trying to shift the blame and make this guy doubt himself. He's realized something's wrong because their relationship was always good, but she's trying to twist things around. He confronted her about it, telling her that they never had issues and he was always there for her, but she couldn't explain herself. That's her trying to confuse and manipulate him, making things look different from what they really are. She said it was one terrible mistake out of 27 great years and I should forget it, as I have nothing to worry about. I told her she may forget it, but I never will. I asked her how long the affair lasted and she said about 6 months, so that's a little longer than what he thought from those messages, because the messages, I think he said it looked like it started in early May and ended before Labor Day. So that's 4 months, but she's saying it lasted 6 months and it probably lasted longer than that if the truth is now she insisted they were only together 6 or 7 times, like that meant something. I told her only 6 or 7 times. You only had sex with another man 6 or 7 times. Wow, thank you. She then started begging me, dropping to the floor and crying at my feet. I let her cry there for a while before telling her to get up and sit on the couch. I then told her to go and move all her stuff into the spare bedroom. Next, I explained that I would be DNA testing our daughter and possibly even our son. Hearing this, she burst into tears, saying that wasn't necessary as both kids were mine. I asked her how she was so sure. She said because she only cheated with the one guy and that our daughter's conception date was during a period where she only had relations with me. I told her, not according to your messages. I then read the message where she told him that during that week, she was with me 4 times and him only once. She burst into tears again because you caught her in another lie. That's why she's crying. Later that day, she moved her stuff into the spare room. That's a positive step. I've noticed in many stories recently that guys are getting smarter. They're not leaving the main bedroom in these situations. They're making their wives move out of the master bedroom and into a spare room, and that's the right thing to do. While she was doing that, I ordered paternity testing kits from 2 different companies. The kits arrived a week later, and I collected the required samples. I told my daughter it was just the doctor's tests we needed to do to reward her for being such a trooper. I took her out for an afternoon of bowling and games at Main Event etc. Now I'm just waiting to get the results back. It's really nerve-wracking and it's negatively impacting my sleep cycle and my mental health. I want to get the results back ASAP, but I'm also terrified of what they may reveal. Once I get the results, I'll come back with another update. And that's the end of his first update. And now he comes back with his final update. And the final update came 89 days after that last update. Almost 3 months later, he says, I apologize for not updating sooner, but things have been a little hectic for me, to say the least. Let me first give you the best news. It turns out my daughter is indeed biologically mine. Both at-home tests showed over 99% certainty. That was my major worry in this whole situation, and I can't express the relief I felt. The results arrived just a week after sending the samples, but I haven't shared this with my wife or anyone else yet. My wife has never brought the subject up again, and neither have I. I'm sure she's still consumed with fear that I may not be the father, and that's okay by me. So he's letting her suffer a little bit. If she ever asked me about it, I'll tell her the truth, but I have no plans to voluntarily do so. As for my marriage, we are legally separated but still living at the same address. Sorta. Our property has an outbuilding garage on it with an attached efficiency apartment. I'm living there and will continue to do so until I eventually divorce my wife. After we bought the house, we initially planned to rent it out, but decided to keep it as a guest quarters for visiting relatives and friends. We also let our son live out there from his junior year in high school until he graduated from college. It was a good way for him to acclimate to being on his own. It's a nice space. At just over 420 square feet was a full bathroom, an efficiency kitchen, and a big living room. After my son moved out, I used the space as my man cave when it was not being occupied by visitors. It even has its separate address, which was a hassle to set up with the post office. The reason I haven't initiated the divorce yet is that I can't bear to be away from my daughter, even for a day. Many guys are in a similar situation, and I completely get it. According to my lawyer, although our state laws favor the betrayed spouse, I need to live in a false state for some time. The best custody outcome I could have gotten was 50%. I didn't want that. I want to see my baby girl every day in our state. A couple can remain legally separated indefinitely. My attorney did caution me on living in the same house, but said since the structure was separate from the main house and has its own address, there should be no issues. While my wife doesn't like being legally separated, she's glad we haven't divorced and is holding out hope we'll reconcile. That's not going to happen, but I let her think there's a chance just to maintain a healthy environment for my daughter. Right now, we're on very good terms and I feel good because I'm controlling all the cards. On the advice of my attorney, we've equally split all of our assets except for the house. That will happen when we eventually do divorce. Now, I'm surprised at that because I didn't know during a legal separation that you split the assets. I thought you did that after the divorce, so that's news to me. Also, as of the separation date, I've required my wife to start contributing half of the upkeep of our house. That's smart. We arranged a new shared account for this specific reason. Monthly, she's required to contribute $929 to cover half of the bills, taxes, and homeowner's insurance. Now she's also responsible for her car insurance and buying all her food and medication. It's a way for her to experience what it's like to manage on her own. My wife has been trying nonstop to convince me to give her another chance. She knows the divorce paperwork is ready to go and sitting at my attorney's office, and I can instruct him to file at any time. Knowing this, she hasn't done anything to upset me and I actually like the arrangement we have for the time being. Prior to the separation, I required that she give me a detailed timeline of her affair and also break the news to our families, including our son. It was a difficult process for her and she has been humbled by the process. We both sat down and told our daughter and she handled it well. She knows we both love her and everything will be okay no matter what. As for the other man, I paid him back. Good. I found out where his wife worked and called her at her office. She answered and I told her who I was. She, of course, remembered me from the neighborhood and we exchanged a few pleasantries. I then told her I needed to discuss something that I recently found out about my wife and her husband. She went silent and said, okay. I think she knew by my tone and the words I used what it was about. She asked for an immediate answer, but I suggested waiting until after her work hours for a proper conversation. About 30 minutes later, she phoned me from her car and I shared all the details. Later that night, I sent her emails containing their messages and a letter where my wife confessed to me outlining the timeline of events. So that's interesting. I can understand him sending the messages they exchanged, but he also went one step further and sent his wife's timeline to the AP's wife. I'm sure his wife, if she found out about that, would not be too happy. But hey, she's the one who cheated. She was upset. And he's talking about here the AP wife, but not emotional. She was angry. They have 3 kids together, ages 19, 17, and 16. She told me she fell out of love with him years ago. She said she was planning to leave him next year after their youngest graduated high school, but said now proof of this affair will be her catalyst to do it now. She thanked me for informing her and we agreed to keep in touch. Interesting thing, this guy had the nerve to call me on my cell. A couple days later, he either got it from a neighbor or found it online somehow. Anyway, I answered the call, thinking it was his wife. Since the area code was the same, I was shocked when he said who he was. He started off apologizing for a good 5 minutes, and I let him go without interrupting. After he said sorry, he told me he wished things could have been resolved calmly without breaking up our families. That made me really upset. I got angry and said some harsh words to him before hanging up. Blocking his number later, I found out from his wife that she'd already asked him to leave and she's going ahead with a divorce. She explained that he recently had some serious health problems that she nursed him through and she felt a little guilt leaving him at this stage of his life. But then, when she thinks about him cheating on her, any guilt she is quickly evaporates. She said he'll likely not do well on his own, as he drinks, doesn't know how to cook or do anything for himself. But she said she doesn't care at this point. She told me she thinks he's cheating on her with other women over the years, but didn't have any concrete proof. Yes, I would say he probably has because, as we always say, once a cheater, always a cheater. She said now that he's old, sick and fat, no one wants his nasty ass, and neither does she. I like her attitude and spunk, but I definitely wouldn't want to get on her bad side. He says, if the guy wasn't such a dog, I might even feel a little sorry for him. But I don't. That's where the story ends for now. Based on how things have gone so far, I could see us living this way until my daughter graduates, or at least until she gets into her teens. So I think he said she's only 9 years old. So he's going to live like that for maybe another 8, 9 years. Are you crazy? He says, I know a lot of you are going to criticize me for not just divorcing her, but I know most dads on here will understand where I'm coming from. Thank you for your thoughtful messages and stay well. So that's the end of his story, and overall I think he handled things very well, except the big mistake he is making is not divorcing her and moving on and moving away. Now I can understand he wants to see his child every day, and if they do divorce then he's probably at best going to get 50-50. He may get something less than that. So I completely understand that, but man, that living arrangement, living on the same property as his wife, I just think that's risky number one, and it also is going to put in play her potentially getting him back. And like I said, I can fully understand he wants to see his daughter every day, but surely there has to be a better way to work things out where he could divorce live nearby and still be able to see her just about every day. I don't know, those are my thoughts, and now I wanted to go through what I think are some of the morals of the story. Number 1, how long ago and how many times doesn't matter. If somebody says, oh, it was 10 years ago when I cheated on you and it was only 1 time, it was only 2 times, it doesn't matter. The fact that you cheated ends it in my book. Next, illicit affairs take incredible planning and deception. Don't let anyone tell you that, oh, it was just spontaneous and it just happened. No, if it's an ongoing affair, that takes enormous planning and deception to pull that off. And this woman, if she carried this on with a neighbor for 6 months, just think of all the sneaking around they had to do next. Every cheater is, by default, a calculated liar, and therefore you can't trust them with anything. Next, cheaters will gaslight you after they are caught. I've read some of these stories and listened to some of these stories online, where guys say, well, I gave her credit because she took all the responsible party for the affair, and she's doing everything that she needs to do. But if you dig into the story a little bit further and listen to the words closer, you'll find out that the cheater was actually trying to pass the buck off on them for cheating and not truly accepting full responsibility. And even if they do accept responsibility, they still cheated on you. And as far as I'm concerned, it's over. Next, a cheater cannot be trusted with anything. Like I just said before, if they cheat on you, what else are they going to do to you? I wouldn't trust them with anything after that. Next, after discovering cheating, immediately consult a lawyer. Protect yourself. Protect your assets. Make sure you get everything lined up. If you have custody issues, start working through that. And I would do so before confronting the cheater next. And this goes for all men, not just men that are dealing with cheaters. Take care of your mental, physical, and financial health. As men, we're always looking out for the well-being of others first, and we put ourselves last. You need to put yourself first because just like they say, when you get on an airplane, you know, if the mask comes down, you put your mask on first before you assist others, because if you don't, you're going to be taken out. And guess what? They may be taken out. If you don't, you're going to be taken out. Because you're not there to help them, so always remember that.